Hey everyone, this is the Vintage Sewing Machine Garage. I'm actually making another video in my sewing machine cabinet series. And that initial video covered quite a few cabinets in my inventory, and I also showed you this cabinet toward the end because I was talking about reasons why people used to buy sewing machine cabinets. And why, if you wanted to sell sewing machines, if your customer already had a cabinet, they were not interested in buying a whole new cabinet. They had paid dearly for them, and remember, the way our ancestors bought things, they were not generally predisposed to buying things that were disposable. Not to make a pun, but that's, they bought things to last. And so very often, as I showed you in the last video, or in the initial video on sewing machine cabinets, I talked a lot about the compatibility of the footprint of the machine. In other words, there is a dimension on the base of the machine where it fits and rests into a sewing table, not to mention the fact that it also has the hinge pin holes in the bed of the machine at certain intervals to line up with the pins of the table. And this was a standard, or a specification, if you will, that was a very important one to have, because not every customer that walked in the door was obviously going to throw out their old table and buy a new one. Why should they? Their old table worked fine. And so, as I mentioned to you, and the emphasis in that first cabinet video was on Singer dimensions. And I showed all of you the two main Singer dimensions, along with a little 3/4 dimension. I also mentioned, when I showed the Necky table, that many manufacturers, the smaller companies in particular, would copy Singer and the dimensions. And by dimensions, I don't mean so much the dimensions of the actual piece of furniture overall, but the dimensions of where the machine went. That was a very important thing to try to match. Because again, Singer had the most business. They were the biggest company, and the most potential a small company might have for getting a Singer customer to switch over to the brand, such as Necky and Pfaff, and many of the other smaller brands, would have been to have dimensions that were the same as Singer. But the White brand, which you see the White rotary here, you all have been seeing a lot lately in my videos. The White company was actually very large, and they were a very sizable competitor for Singer. In fact, they were the second largest sewing machine manufacturer on the planet after Singer. And so they intentionally, of course, did not have the same dimensions. So I wanted to be sure I covered the dimensions of the White tables, and I'll show you a little connection as to why this might matter to you, even if you don't have a White sewing machine. So, for the White rotary standard, the depth is 7 1/4 inches. You'll recall that the Singers were 7. So, Singer and White machines are not compatible with each other's tables from this period. The length is 16 3/4 of an inch. Okay, so that is also longer than the Singer dimension was. Now, eventually, you may have seen some of my other videos on White branded sewing machines from the 1960s. Those machines were based on, they were very much like the other Japanese clones of the Singer in terms of using the, they would use the Singer 15 class bobbin and shuttle design, and then they had some other features that they borrowed from the Necky brand in Italy and others. But the point here is that later on, even you're still in vintage heirloom territory, but in the 60s, you'll start to notice the White machines would have the rounded corners, and they would fit into Singer cabinets. But that was a very late shift in the White company's design specs, because for much of its history, their dimensions were different from Singer. They were big enough they could try to take a Singer customer away and sell them a table. But many people were brand loyal. So a lot of the people who bought this machine in the late 40s had probably sewn very likely on a white rotary or some white sewing machine or another rotary brand that would fit a white table. In fact, there would have been customers who bought this machine who didn't need to buy a table because they had a table that would fit this dimension. Now, I mentioned to you earlier that this might matter to some of you who don't have a white branded machine, because remember that White had the contract with Sears and Roebuck for many years. And so many, in fact, virtually all of the Kenmore rotaries, not only do they have the mechanicals in common underneath, although their body shapes will very well be different, as will the branding and some of the knobs and stuff. But the core engineering of the Kenmore rotaries is exactly the same as the White, with some modifications to things like the attention assemblies, a few other changes here and there. But the cores of the machine were the same, and that includes the footprint. If I were to take a Kenmore rotary from the same decades as this model, it would fit right into this table. And what's interesting is that if I pan over to the left here, this is kind of a sneak peek at my latest acquisition. I just bought a Kenmore 158.90 model, and it sometimes will say 904, 905. They had different numeric changes over time. But this machine that I'm going to take the cover off and let you see, this is the original case. This machine was purchased with a sewing machine case. Whoever bought this decided they didn't want to buy a Kenmore table, and you can't blame them now that you know how much those things cost back in the day. But I'm going to zoom in here and let you guys see this. This is really interesting because when I measure the Kenmore, it is in fact 7 1/4 inches deep. And there it is, 16 3/4 inch long. So this Kenmore, and this Kenmore was made approximately, I'm going to say 1962, 1963, thereabouts, right? Early 1960s. And yet, it will fit into a table that holds a White sewing machine from the 40s. So again, the White company was doing the same thing that Singer was doing. They were trying to create a standard, a specification, so that their customers would come back to them. Because even if you couldn't sell them a table, hey, you've got a table at home that holds a White, well, you want a new White machine, don't you? So you can use the table you had before. And if the customer went to Sears to get the Kenmore, that was okay because the White company was still contracting with Sears. Now this machine was made in Japan. At this point, Marusan was producing that sewing machine. But the White company still had influence with Sears, and so again, they were, you'll see the connection here because the company in Japan was told, we want the base of the machine to be this size. Why? Because so many of Sears' customers, of course, in fact, had been customers of the White Sewing Company because White had made so many of the Kenmore models. So anyway, I hope that this sort of explains to you all what in the world these machines have in common, and why is it that you sometimes see the same opening in a sewing cabinet. You may see different styling and different widths and different levels of drawers and fanciness, but you'll notice that the opening for the machine, there's a consistency. And so during the vintage period that I'm referring to when I talk about the machines you see me restore, the two most common sizes are those I shared with you in the first video on cabinets, which emphasizes the Singer dimensions. And this is all about the White or Kenmore dimensions from the vintage era, and you see these quite often. Another way to to distinguish between the two is the fact that with the White and Kenmore bases, let's say you come up on a table and there is no machine and you're trying to figure out, well, what machine went in here? The first thing you'll notice is that the corners on the White and the Kenmores are 90 degrees, right? They're 90-degree corners. They don't have a curve like the Singer corners did. And that is one hallmark. And then you really want to have a tape measure with you, any kind of straight edge. You can have, a fabric tape measure, or in this case, I have this one. But it doesn't matter what kind, but have one with you. That way you will know for sure. If you have a machine at home and you're looking for a table, measure the dimensions of your machine. And also remember, guys, you want to measure. The other thing you can measure is the distance between the hinge pins. Hopefully the table you're looking at will have hinges in it, or those hinges may be stuck into the machine if someone removed them. And when we get into our restoration series of the cabinets, or I should say those videos will come in the cabinet series, and we'll talk about what you can do if your cabinet has no hinge pins. But many of them will. Sometimes people take the machine out and leave the pins. But notice that I've got exactly 9.5 inches between where each pin is here on the White model. And sure enough, folks, the same exact distance lies between the hinge pins of this Kenmore over 20 years plus later. So this again is something that hopefully will help you when you're trying to ascertain, hey, what table goes with what machine? And if you're ever searching for a table for a machine and you're not sure if it will fit, in addition to getting the dimensions of the bed surface of the machine, you can actually go ahead and measure the distance between the pins that hold your machine into place. The dimensions such as that I just showed you on the Kenmore and the White. And you can do this with any sewing machine. And if you're not sure, or maybe it doesn't have the hinge pins, look on the back edge of your sewing machine bed. Okay? So find the surface of your machine and look on the back edge, and you should see two holes that hold the pins that are attached to the little hinges that screw into the tables. You can also measure that distance. And between that and measuring the footprint of your machine, that should help guide you when you're buying a table so that you know ahead of time, hey, am I getting a table that's compatible with the sewing machine I have? And if you have a table and you would like to find a machine for it, of course you would do this in reverse. You would simply measure the opening of the table. You will know whether it has its hinge pins or not. You'll know where to measure for the hinge pin dimensions and where they lie, and you can take that with you and hopefully find yourself a table, regardless of the style. When these companies made tables, typically their dimensions were true and reliable for almost all of their machines, with the exception, of course, of the 3/4 Singers, and I showed you guys in that first cabinet series video that you could in fact have a 3/4 version where you would have the shorter dimensions for the opening, and that would apply to, of course, the Singer 99s, the Singer 185Js. Those are one of the only brands that did this. But if you are curious about sewing tables, stay tuned. I'm going to be adding to this series. We're going to talk about how to overhaul and recondition and restore them. We're going to talk about how to get them moved without, hopefully, dinging them or damaging them. And that includes your machine. And there may be other videos to be made in the cabinet series. You never know. If you have any ideas for things you'd like to learn about cabinets that I haven't talked about yet or that I've mentioned are coming, just let me know down in the comments below. And I appreciate you all watching and taking time to learn about something very few people ever think about, which is, of course, the tables and the cases that their vintage sewing machines come in or could be placed in. And by the way, everything I just shared with you about tables, of course, applies to cases. And so whether it is one of the cases from the 60s or the Bentwood Singer cases that I've shown before, again, you want to make sure that the bed of the machine has the same footprint as the opening in either the case or the table, And if you do that, you should be fine. And there are different ways to decide if you're going to go with knee control or foot control, or in the case of singers, sometimes both. But that's it, guys. That is, again, more information about the other big brand of sewing machines and how they fit into cabinets and cases. If you have a question about another brand, again, you'll want to use these measurements as a guide. The vast majority of sewing machine tables and cabinets either had the white/Kenmore dimension specified, or as even more of them were built, and you will see this when you go looking for tables, the majority of them were built to hold Singers or machines that were copying Singer. And so take your tape measure and your ruler with you when you're looking, and that should help. I should hope that will help you avoid buying a table that doesn't fit your machine. Thanks everyone for watching, and stay tuned for more videos. You can click on the little bell symbol if you're subscribed, and it will let you know when future videos are posting. Thank you for your support.